every single episode was that, oh, thanks for recording. What got me watching every single episode of Cosmic Disclosure was what Corey Good had said about being given these special tests in elementary school as a 6-year-old child. And I was also given these special tests. As a child at 6 years old, they told me that I would get to go to a special school for gifted children if I passed my test. I see some of you nodding your heads, and yes, I'm sure some of us had these tests too. And luckily for me though, I didn't pass my special tests. My parents just told me that the schools I didn't pass, and as a kid I was really disappointed that I didn't get to go to the special school, but as an adult, I did ask my parents about these tests after I found Cosmic Disclosure, and they did say the school sent them letters about the tests, and then they sent them a letter saying that I was not what they were looking for. So as an adult, I was really glad I wasn't whatever the MyLab programs or whatever, I wasn't what they were looking for. But this dude, Corey Good, I knew he knew some true stuff about real life, reality that I had to go through. So this wasn't just conspiracy theory anymore, this was conspiracy reality we were all living in, and what he had to say made a lot of good sense, actually, even though that sounded so weird what he was saying, and I didn't know who these dudes were, David and Corey, and I thought, well, they had 52 episodes of this boring-ass show planned, like 2 dudes sitting in chairs interviewing each other. I'm gonna watch every single one, right? They seemed to have genuine intent. They didn't want to like dupe people about some crazy theories. So in 2016, Corey Good he shared an article that Bridget Nielsen had written about high-vibe food and high-vibe diets. And I was really interested in this article because I had used just a self-imposed, very clean diet to heal my body from HPV. I was trying to heal cavities and all that kind of thing. But my dentist wanted to put 6 fillings in my head, and I said no. When I read this article, I made the connection that this woman, Bridget Nielsen, that had written this article about food, was the same woman that I thought was totally cuckoo crazy a year earlier, having found her YouTube video about hybrid alien children, but by now I had been watching Cosmic Disclosure and I knew that what she was saying about there being a hybrid alien child breeding program going on with humans on Earth to help heal timelines or whatever, that this was very plausible, what she was saying could be true. And so when I rediscovered Bridget through Corey, I read Barbara Lamb's book, Alien Experiences, because Bridget Nielsen had been to see Barbara Lamb for her hypnotherapy session where she discovered all this stuff about hybrid alien children. And so I had all of this knowledge stuffed into my consciousness within just 1 year. And I think this was my free will ticket into remembering my experience in a parallel timeline where most people just would have easily forgotten. And now hopefully after you hear what I have to say today about what happened to me there, you will be able to go into meditation, you will be able to, in your sleeping dream time, experience maybe even interacting with yourself from these full disclosure timelines and be able to be more proficient at bringing that here for us, and we can all have that unfold before our very eyes in our experience here. So before I was taken to the parallel timeline, on the morning that I was taken there, I woke up at 1 a.m. and this was very unusual for me because I was working 2 jobs at the time, a full-time job as a preschool teacher and part-time at a restaurant, because just trying to live on a preschool teacher's salary is just so difficult. I was working 60 to 80 hours a week, 7 days a week. Sleep was one of the most important things in my life. So it was very unusual for me to just wake up only a few hours after having gone to sleep. And woke up at 1 a.m. very well rested, and I thought it was time to go to work, but it was dark out, and it's only 1 a.m., that's so weird. But then my computer started acting weird. It would wake up even though it was supposed to be asleep. And after a few times I shut that thing down because I wanted to just stop doing that. Nothing seemed to be wrong with it. And then it turned on even though it was supposed to be shut down. So I knew like something weird's going on in my reality. I was trying to check in with my psyche. Barbara Lamb's book, Alien Experiences, had said that electronics seem to malfunction surrounding alien abduction, but I didn't give a flying rip if I was about to be abducted by aliens, because people that get abducted by aliens don't remember it in the morning anyways, so who cares if I'm going to get abducted by aliens? I just need a few good hours of sleep before I have to go to work again, and I don't care if I'm going to get abducted by aliens because I don't even remember it, so what, right? So I just forced myself to go back to sleep. I got back to sleep around 3:30 in the morning, and the next thing I knew, I woke up in a hospital. And honestly, at first I had thought that I had been in an accident and I couldn't remember what happened to me. Like I had amnesia. The accident must have been so terrible. And there were 2 gentlemen in the hospital, and at first I thought they seemed familiar, so at first I thought that maybe they had rescued me from the accident and helped me get to the hospital, and they were just friends I hadn't remembered meeting yet, but actually they worked in the hospital. There was two gentlemen, one of them was named Nicholas, and he was like my full-time caregiver in the hospital, younger gentleman, maybe in his 30s like me, and there was an older gentleman named Peter, like graying hair, very doctorly, very about his business, and Peter would only come in sometimes, and when Peter would come in, now these gentlemen, they worked in the hospital, but they didn't wear like lab coats or nurse scrubs or anything like that. They wore just regular civilian clothing, stuff that would be very casual to you and me, khaki pants, polo shirts kind of thing. And Peter would only come in sometimes, and when he would come in, they would do these virtual reality experiments on me, kind of like the holodeck on Star Trek, and I had been watching Cosmic Disclosure, so I knew that the secret space program had this type of technology. And it was just like the experiments were trying to get information about me, what was important to me. They wanted me to explain how to make kombucha, which I had written a book about here. And at one point in the experiments, I told Peter and Nicholas, I said, I know this is just virtual reality, it's just pretend for fake, you know, like you can knock it off kind of thing now. And the experiments didn't work out so well after that. Peter was not happy that I knew this. And in some of these sessions, I would interact with myself from other timelines, maybe even living on other planets. And then I would go down a whooshy time tunnel, and between each session, I would think that I was going to wake up back in my life in Seattle and everything would go back to normal, but I kept waking up back in the hospital. And I knew the time, like the passage of time, just like we do here, and there was a window in my hospital room, and the glass was frosted, so I could see the quality of light coming in. I knew when it was like morning, evening, but the glass, I knew that Peter and Nicholas had the technology to make this glass clear if they wanted, but they wouldn't do it. Like I wanted to see out, see the city, see where I was, but they wouldn't do it, and I was a little frustrated with them. So on the third day, on the morning, I woke up and I asked Nicholas, I said, when are you going to send me back? When are you going to send me home, kind of thing? I'm done with this hospital, I'm clearly not sick, right? But he said, oh no, you can't go back yet, we need you to heal the other timelines. And I thought, well, the last episode of Wisdom Teachings that I remembered watching was about the 3D mantle bulb. If you haven't seen this episode, you should try to get to watch it somehow. It's about how all matter in the universe interacts in this way as a function of platonic solids that fit inside of each other and blossom in this beautiful fractal shape that's the 3D shape of the Mandelbrot set fractal, called the 3D mantle bulb. And when I was watching this episode in our timeline, I thought, well, if all matter interacts this way, then all time must also interact this way. And when Nicholas said they needed me to heal other timelines or something like that, I thought, well, maybe I know more about time than most people, and I could do something to help heal time. I didn't know this was a weird hospital, but everything seemed fairly normal at the same time. But there's no medical equipment in the hospital, just a hospital bed, very clearly hospital room. And there were 3 doors in the hospital room. One door to exit the hospital, one door on this side of the bed I think was to Peter's office where he stormed off when he wasn't happy that I knew this was just fake holodeck reality, virtual reality technology. And then another door was on this side of the hospital bed, and this door could go into any room in the hospital that they wanted. It was just the technology they had. It wasn't weird to them, but it's weird to us that doorways might go into a different room each time the door opens, but this was just what they did there. Like, I don't know how, but that was normal to them. And on this particular morning, the door was open, and I wanted to see where it was going. So I went through the door, and there was an operating room in there, and there was me from another timeline on a medical operating table. She was like a teenager, maybe 13 to 16 years old, and she was dying, and they were trying to save her. And there was a nurse in the operating room, but this nurse was not human looking. She was like a cross, I just assume it was she, I don't know. She was like a cross between a praying mantis type being and a gray alien type being, and she was trying to like fix the girl on the table there with her praying mantis arms. And in Cosmic Disclosure, after I had this experience in our timeline, I heard Corey Good talk about these beings on Cosmic Disclosure, that they would bring them in for very specialized healing when they need something really more like hardcore done. And so I thought, well, that makes sense because I saw one in the parallel timeline. But there were also these me's from other timelines in the operating room in different stages of life. And it was like they needed us all there somehow so they could save this dying me on the table that was a teenager. And this nurse also, it didn't seem socially unacceptable. It was like she was nude. I don't know, or maybe she had a suit on, I don't know. But she was just so loving and kind and healing, just like healing energy just radiated from her being. Like you could get healed just standing in her aura. And I didn't even know if all of these other me's in the room were even named Allison or if they even all spoke English. The elderly me, there was an elderly me, a child me, maybe 6 to 8 years old, and there was a baby me, and there was a me Allison in my early 30s in there. And I didn't know if they spoke English or if their names were Allison. I wasn't going to call them Allison because maybe that wasn't their name. But the elderly me did speak English. I asked her for a hug. She knew what I was talking about. But the kids just looked really scared, like they had this glazed over, scared, confused look in their eyes. And I thought, well, it doesn't matter if they're scared. They're just going to go home and wake up from this like it's a dream, even though it's not. And when I heard that thought, I was like, well, that's kind of a weird thing to think. If this was actually a dream, I wouldn't think that. And this clearly was not a dream. I could see out the window of this operating room. It was clear glass. It wasn't frosted over, and I could see out, and I could see blue sky and an office-looking type building next door. And so I was like, this is clearly not a dream. Everything here seems fairly normal. Blue sky outside. It's a little weird. They got aliens for nurses, and they have all the technology that I heard Corey Good and David Wilcock talking about. But it's, I know the passage of time. I'm experiencing everything with my five senses. I actually also didn't have to wear glasses in there, so everything seemed very normal, even though it was a little peculiar at hospital. When the nurse was done with whatever she was doing with the girl on the table, she kind of shooed me back to my room with her big praying mantis arm. She was just like, go, go, go. Just so loving and nice and kind. And I went back to the room where I was staying, and Nicholas was there to help take care of me. And they had sent in a monkey into my room on that particular morning for like emotional, moral support, like comfort animal. And I knew, because I had been there for 3 days. It was longer than I had usually been there. I thought maybe I had been there before. And so this monkey's name was Muffin, and I knew they had bred and trained this monkey for this purpose. Just emotional, moral support, comfort animal. It had really soft fur, and it had a collar, but it wasn't around its neck. It was around its waist, like a belt collar, and the collar had a tag on it, and this tag felt a lot like that. It was a lot like that fabric that's on construction worker or crossing guard jackets where it's reflective, but it's also a fabric. But this tag was also a screen, and it had a readout on the screen coming up, that things that would pop up every now and then, and I knew this screen was somehow attached to my consciousness or my timeline somehow, and I read a message that popped up on the screen that said, Trump's defeat before you return. Now in October of 2016, this was just before the presidential election between Hillary and Trump. I didn't know if this message meant that Hillary was going to defeat Trump and become president, or if Trump was going to win, and this defeat was a metaphor for his verbal diarrhea that would just get way toned down after actually becoming president. Because Corey Good on Cosmic Disclosure was saying that the alliance was really rooting for Trump to become president. This message could have also meant that Trump was going to become president and get impeached later on, or he was going to become president, and after 4 years he was going to run for a second term and he would get defeated by whoever he would run against. Now, it's 2021 and we all know what happened to him, but in 2016 I didn't know what that message meant. I went over to Nicholas, who was there in my hospital room, and I said to him, Nicholas, I know that's not your real name, it's just the name that you've told me that it is, that you want me to call you, but if I knew your real name, I would use it right now. If something happens in a country while I'm here, will you let me watch the news? Because I didn't know that I was in another timeline at that point. I just said the news from my country, and he knew that I didn't watch the news. He had to study the people and the timelines that he'd taken them from, and he knew I didn't watch the news, and so he was just like, why would you want to watch the news? Whatever would be so important that you'd want to watch the news for? And I said, well, the presidential election in 2016, I read this on Muffin's tag, Trump's defeat before you return. If the election happens while I'm still here, because they were going to keep me here, right? They needed me to heal timelines or whatever. They were going to send me home. So I said, if the election happens while I'm still here, will you let me watch the news so I know who becomes president in my country? And Nicholas didn't really know how to answer me. He just said, well, come over to me, we're going to go to the roof. And I didn't know why we were going to go to the roof. I was really excited to get out of that hospital room. I stayed in for 2 whole days. I wanted some adventure, so I was so excited inside, yay, we're going to the roof, So I went over to where he was standing near the window, and boom, we were on the roof of the hospital. It was like they had short-range teleportation, like no big deal, right? I had heard about that from Corey and David. And when we got to the roof, we were looking out at the city, and I was trying my darndest to figure out where the heck I was. Was I on another planet? Was I in the future? This really wasn't an alien spaceship abducted by aliens. And I saw these pyramid on top of cube-shaped buildings off this way that I thought were residential areas maybe. And I saw every once in a while a big spirally skyscraper would come up, and all the buildings were a lot lower than the one we were standing on off this way. And then I saw a big hoopity thing off in the distance, and I was like, I couldn't tell even if that was just a Ferris wheel at an amusement park just for fun, or if that was actually a piece of technology. And Nicholas wouldn't tell me where I was. He seemed very distracted. He was asking me weird questions about his timeline that somehow I knew the answer to, and I don't know how. And then this piece of technology floated over towards his head, and it was like an upside-down wiffle ball scoop, but it was a piece of technology, like a little drone. It floated over, and if my arm was the handle, Nicholas grabbed it out of the air, and he scanned his head with it, so it kind of went like this. And immediately he turned into this android-looking robot person, but it was like he was a robot, but it was like he was still a person with a soul. You could see the plates in his head, you could see blue light coming out of his joints like he was made of pieces. And I freaked out inside because I had been watching Cosmic Disclosure and I thought there was transhumanism here. I had been learned about the AI virus and how it had taken over whole galaxies. I was afraid maybe they're going to try and turn me into a robot. And sure enough, I looked over in the office building next door and there was these AI-looking white skin. They look a lot like the robots we see in our Hollywood movies. They were walking around helping people that looked human like me. And it made sense that Nicholas was a robot. He was always there in my hospital room to take care of me. I don't even know if he ever slept. And so I freaked out. I ran over to these girls from the public on the roof of the hospital. So we were on the roof, but it was also like we were at the front entrance street corner of the hospital. The half of the roof that we were on was like a big transportation station, like airport, bus station, train station kind of place. And the other half of the roof was like a multi-lane road. And there were these buses, long public transportation buses. They would land on the roof, people would get on, people would get off, and they would take off on the other side of the roof. And so I figured they had free energy, public flying transportation, and I couldn't see those things when I looked out at the city, so I figured they must have had cloaking devices, right? No big deal. I heard about that from David Wilcock. So I ran over to these girls from the public because I was scared there was transhumanism, whatever this weird society was that I had found myself in, and I begged and pleaded with this young group of girls, like maybe early 20s. I begged to them not to give over to transhumanism, not to let the government put chips in their hands and augment their bodies with technology, not to let this technology scan their head and turn them into robots. And one of the girls laughed and she goes, haha, I would never do that. Being a biological organism is so cool. And I was taken aback because she used this slang that I knew of from where I was from. She said so cool. And she knew about transhumanism. It wasn't just some crack conspiracy idea, and she didn't think transhumanism was a good idea. And so I was like, what's going on here? And I looked over at Nicholas down on the roof, and he just had his head in his hand like this. But he looked embarrassed, but I couldn't tell these people's body language anymore. It was like being in another country, and I couldn't tell if their body language meant the same thing that I knew from home. And so I wanted to march over to him and demand to tell me what hospital this was and what city I was in. So I started walking over to him, and on the way I saw this directional sign, and it looked very much like the signs that we have to the entrance of the parking lots in hospitals that tells you where to go, like maternity this way, radiology this way. It's very blocky and on top of each other. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go to any hospital, go to their parking lots, you'll see these like signs. And this sign was in English with English letters and English words that I could read. And I was just so confused, like, why is this public sign with English letters and English words I can read? And I was looking for the name of the hospital, but it wasn't on the sign. And several months after this experience, I did have a hypnotherapy session that's also available to listen to on my website because I wanted to remember what I had read on this sign. And it's the only thing that I forgot when I woke up from the experience, but it was a doctor's name that was a doctor of looking glass technology. So they had this, and they were a very high vibe timeline, so they probably could outwit the cabal in our timeline, no question. But the thing that I was looking for on the sign wasn't there. I was looking for the hospital name. But I went over to Nicholas, and he said to me, we don't have transhumanism here. And I thought, that's exactly what a lying robot from a transhumanist society would. But he said, again, no, we don't have transhumanism in this timeline. And I thought, oh, this timeline, am I in like a parallel universe or something? Because I'd heard of those. I had a lot of holistic studies and things like that. And he started speaking to me telepathically. Now, I'd heard about interfacing from Corey Good, but this is the time that I remember experiencing it. It was like our consciousnesses had a consciousness conversation, and it could have been 3 seconds, it could have been 3 minutes. It was a very short amount of time, but we exchanged a ton of information in that very short amount of time. These people could speak, but they could also be telepathic when what they had to say took more time than they had to say it in. And when he started speaking to me telepathically, he said, we can't lie like you can. Like, we don't have that deception here. And I was like, oh, they're telepathic. Maybe he's right. Maybe they can't lie. Maybe they don't have transhumanism. And then he said, with his consciousness, we don't have a military-industrial complex. And my mind was like, what? How did that ever happen? How did you get away with that? They're so insidious, right? And he told me, we're in America, he meant the United States, where it's 2016 for us too. And he told me where our timelines had bifurcated. It was like our timelines were cousins somehow. And he said in the early 1950s, shortly after the UFO flyover Washington, D.C., someone from the American government told the American people the truth. And he meant the truth about flying saucers, extraterrestrials, and they found out what the Germans were doing with their flying saucer technology and how they got this information from off-world peoples coming to visit us or communicating telepathically or whatnot. And Nicholas used the term, his consciousness used the term UFOs before the disclosure and used the term flying saucers to describe them after the disclosure. So I thought that was interesting, and he didn't say who this person from the American government was. He didn't say if it was the president or not, or what had happened to them for doing this disclosure, and my mind wanted to know if it was the president. And he didn't say whether or not it was, but he did say that Eisenhower was their last president-elect. Now, I'd like to think that it was Eisenhower who did this disclosure in their timeline, but it would make sense, but I don't know. And he said that for about a decade or two, there was a lot of civil unrest. Not civil war, but civil unrest. Like, everybody had to rethink their lives, how they related to themselves and other people and the world and their place in the universe. They had to really change their consciousness and their beliefs and their way of life. And so a lot of civil unrest, and then after a couple decades, benevolent peoples came to them and started helping them through the transition with technology and knowledge and information. And he said that even though this disclosure seemed to take decades in his timeline, if we had disclosure here somehow, it would only take 3 to 5 years. It would be very fast because of the technology we have here with the internet. And he had to study the people on the timelines that he had taken them from, the people that he was caring for, and he said that he found it very fascinating who was president after Eisenhower. He found it fascinating that we took a rocket to the moon and then we're told all this different stuff, front-loaded all this different stuff than what our government and military goes off and does and makes technology, and he found that secrecy system so intricate and fascinating. And so he said that it was 2016 for them, and their Ascension event hadn't happened for them either. That everybody was probably expecting in 2012 or whatever. And they were approached by off-world beings, and they were told that doing this timeline healing would be very beneficial for humanity. So they erected these timeline healing hospitals, and they started doing this timeline healing work. And when his consciousness was talking to my consciousness, he really got why it was so important for him to do this work. He was just like, man, you really got it bad over there in your timeline. It was like they were trying to heal timelines that were more negative, more ill, sick than theirs. And I thought maybe this was also an explanation for the Mandela effect, that I know Raw to Your Ear said that, told Corey, we're not doing the Mandela effect, you are. But that makes sense that us, it's not just us in our timeline here, it's us in multiple timelines trying to heal time back together, and maybe that's what's causing the Mandela effect, I don't know. But Nicholas, he seemed to know about the spirit being lines, like it must have been them that had given them this message in their timeline about doing this timeline healing work, because in our timeline, we were given the message through Corey Good from the Spirit Being Alliance, just be loving, just be nice, forgive yourselves and others, and stop the wheel of karma, right? But that's what we were ready for. And in Nicholas's timeline, they were already a very loving, healing, consciousness-raising type people, very compassionate, and they were told to do this timeline healing work. That might be beneficial for humanity because this negativity was still in the solar system somehow. So he knew about the Spirit Being Alliance and thought, well, are Corey Good and David Wilcock in your timeline? And he said, yes, his consciousness used this phrase, the entities you know of as David Wilcock and Corey Good. Like maybe that wasn't their names there, I don't know, but they seem to have very similar jobs as they did here in 2016. Corey Good was an ambassador to the Spirit Being Alliance and these other terrestrial groups you have meetings with, and David Wilcock was a spiritual scientist, metaphysician, and his job was to help translate and disseminate the briefings that Corey would receive from these different groups. But what these two men were doing in Nicholas's timeline was common knowledge. You could waltz down the street and talk to anyone and, hey, how about that Corey and David, or whatever their names are, and they would know who you were talking about. But you couldn't do that here, and Nicholas found that so fascinating. Like, you could waltz down the street and talk about this oafy dude Trump, and everyone would know who that was, but these two men were doing such an important job for humanity, and nobody really knew for the public. Like, some people did, like us, but people didn't really know. So David and Corey were in his timeline, and I wanted to know if I was in his timeline too. And he said that yes, I was a teacher in education, and I had made a lot of very good advancements in education, but I felt like there was more that I could do for humanity, so I applied to this timeline healing hospital to have my timelines healed, knowing full well that we are consciously connected to all of ourselves in all of our timelines. And that's one of the most important things I learned from this experience. I think I also learned that we don't live in parallel universes. We all live in one universe with different timelines. So if you can kind of understand sort of that kind of thing, I think that you'll be more proficient going into meditation or through your sleep or dreams and connecting with yourself in these more high vibe timelines and bringing high vibe vibrations, consciousness changing knowledge and information for yourself and for humanity and the planet here. And we can watch this disclosure here happen more easily. Now, Nicholas didn't tell me where I was. He just had to go off somewhere and talk to his superiors about me because my consciousness was in a very different place than the timeline they'd taken me from. And he went off somehow, and before he left, he said, just stay here. Like, I'm going to be right back, just stay here. But I didn't want to stay there. I wanted to get on a bus, find the library, learn what happened to them. Everything was free. Everything was free. They didn't use money like we did, but they went to their jobs for 3 to 10 hours a day, whenever they wanted, because they were excited and passionate about what they were doing and how it was helping humanity. There are these boys, skater boys on the front steps of the hospital, and they're the ones that told me that I was in Anaheim, and I didn't know where Anaheim was at the time. I knew, ignorant American, I knew that it was a city in the United States, but I didn't know what state it was in. And so when I came back here, I was having a hard time coming back here. In lucid dreaming and acid projection, if you just think about your body, boom, you're back. It's very easy. I used to do that more when I was a teenager, but in this experience, in these time jumping experiences, I had to think really hard about my life here to come back. So I did that. I remembered what Corey Good had said, that some beings travel in the universe with their consciousness, not with ships. So I came back here, and my computer turned on again. I thought how wonderful it is that they know about quantum physics. They have this technology to pinpoint a soul's energy anywhere in the timelines and pull them into this timeline healing hospital for healing. And the cabal would never know, right? I was just so happy that nobody was going to be on my tail. I was going to have helicopters flying from my house when they went to a parallel timeline. I just wanted to call in sick to work, but you can't call in sick and be like, hey, I visited a parallel timeline. But you can't do that, so I had to go to work. I just wanted a day to rest and just process what had.
You could tell me, I would believe it.
So after work, I made this 2-hour YouTube video about my experience, and I thought, no one's going to watch this shit. I just need to get it off my chest. But my coworker watched it, and Mike watched it, and they both said they had consciousness-changing experiences after learning about my experience. So that's really important. For the last minute that I have, maybe, I'm going to go through the differences that I saw between our present timeline here and the 3123 timeline when I visited my house. When I first got to my house, I noticed I didn't have a closet. All of my clothes were neatly folded and laid out on this Lazy Susan type table that looked a lot like displayed at clothing stores that we have here. We didn't use house keys anymore. There was a cascade looking device in my home, but it was a time machine. And so people there travel in time, just like we play video games. No big deal. I lived in a giant room with sections that I had been given to by society. We didn't have to pay rent. I lived in a very tall building, or was a building in a sky city. Like when I looked out the window, I couldn't see the ground. And I looked on my personal device, and the date said it was 3123. So I was like, oh my gosh, where did the last 1,000 years go? I don't know. But I had roommates on this floor of the building that I lived in, and some of them looked like friends that I have here. And I knew about reincarnation, so it wasn't weird that some of them looked like friends that I know. But there was no money and no work, so I was afraid that I was going to get up late and be late to work in the morning. But there was no money and no work, but there was hierarchical structure to society, but it was more based on a person's personality and their life choices. So a couple of my roommates, they were slobs compared to my 3123 perspective, and they wanted to mess up their room however they wanted all day, every day. And we had a cleaning service that came to help us clean our rooms every day. So they were happy to give the cleaning service a purpose for service. And they kind of hee-hee poo-pooed me for being such a neat, organized person and not giving the cleaning service enough work to do. But I was a more neat, organized person, and I was given this giant room with sections to live in, and they lived in a very tiny room that was about as big as 2 bedrooms, but had no sections in it. And so those are some of the differences that I saw, and maybe something that I've said here today has helped change your consciousness for the better and help you connect with yourselves in these other high vibe, full disclosure timelines, and we can meld our timelines with theirs and come together and be as one. So I thank you so much for being here and so much for listening.